Episode 14 is where we begin to transition into the last solid arc of Season 2, Mountain Glen. The episode begins with Osmond, Glinda, and Ironwood arguing over the breach of security at the CCT. Glinda even questions why Ironwood's forces were there that night, as normally there's a traditional desk agent there. But Ironwood explains that the Council of Vale and the Atlas Roundtable struck up a deal allowing him to use it as a housing station for some sensitive material, and thus allowed his men to take up the bulk of the guard duty while they were present for the festival. He also has a remark that were the Legion units he has not offline for temporary maintenance, the CCT should have been easily defended. This leads him to suspect a breach of security connected with a batch of paladins that had been swiped from Atlas R&D. This is when RWBY walks in, invited by Osmond, who wanted to hear a debriefing of the incident from her perspective first thing the following morning. RWBY describes what she talked about with Ironwood in the encounter with Cinder, though because of our modified timeline there's no mention of any woman from the night they met RWBY. As far as anyone in that room is aware, the woman RWBY and Ironwood sparred against is a whole new entity. With her spiel finished, RWBY is promptly dismissed over the matter, though Osmond is visibly troubled that RWBY told Ironwood about what she'd uncovered. The butting of heads between Ironwood and Glinda continues, especially with Ironwood borderline demanding a full-scale sweep of Vale's southeastern outskirts now that he's been properly caught up to Team RWBY's findings. Osmond talks them both down, citing that if this infiltration goes beyond Vale just like they suspected for a while, then they'll need to keep their hand close to their chest. He then reasons that the plan will be to send in quote-unquote scouts. It's here that we cut the Team RWBY back at the dorm with her team commenting on RWBY's actions the previous night. Nothing really changes here, and yes, we're keeping Zwei in the scenario despite my first instinct being to cut him entirely. His inclusion goes a long way towards humanizing Weiss. That shot with Blake crawling around the bedroom was legitimately great, and the extra 2 episodes will help buffer the previously sudden nature of his appearance. All the same, when called for their first school-based mission, RWBY hatches a plan to smuggle Zwei with them via a backpack. We switch over to the assembly to christen the first official training mission for the freshmen, with Osmond giving a speech about the role huntsmen fill in society, as guardians, as warriors, as saviors, and how dangerous it is to take up such a mantle. As such, the art of training huntsmen has been refined over the years, and while book smart, studying, and sparring all have their uses, the most direct and effective form of training has always proven to be first-hand experience. To that end, all trainees in their first year will undergo their first officially sanctioned mission while shadowing a fellow huntsman in the field. This number includes those students who transfer to the school for the semester leading up to the Vytal tournament. Students will be free to choose their assignment from a pre-compiled list that has been vetted for safety while also maximizing the amount of experience a team would gain from the trip. He dismisses them to choose their assignments for the following week, giving them a spiel about being safe and all that junk. We jump to Team RWBY, who have already discussed their plan a bit ahead of time. They agree to all look for missions that shadow huntsmen in the southeast of Vale and scour the boards, not finding any that are particularly close to where they intend to search. When RWBY suggests mailing themselves there, Osmond steps in and mentions the southeast has been delegated to second-year missions because of the high Grim concentration there. He then voices his deductions that their team will wind up going there anyway, especially considering Team RWBY's penchant for sticking their noses where they don't belong. He agrees to bend the rules and puts a search and destroy mission on the board that heads to Quadrant 4 with RWBY listed as the student attachés. He gives his ominous farewell and we cut to the team setting up for their mission. Along the way they run into Team Coffee, who are battle-weary and tired from their mission, which Weiss helpfully points out went a week over expectation. Having Coffee as established characters with actual dynamics and personalities beyond basic character design and establishing scenes, when Velvet says there were just so many of them, we the audience now have a more appreciable sense of dread over the threat the Grim hold in the story. How the episode ends doesn't really change, with Oobleck surprising Team RWBY as the presiding huntsman, so we can quickly move on to the next episode. Which begins right back where we were, with Oobleck waving off what supplies and provisions they've already packed and explaining the game plan for the reconnaissance mission. With all that squared away, he goes off to prep the bullhead while Juniper, Sun, and Neptune approach to see RWBY off, explaining their own missions, shadowing the hunting guild of a nearby village and shadowing police attachés, respectively. Though I'm pointedly cutting John fawning over the junior detective badges because, come on, his dream is to be a huntsman like the rest of his family, why would badges from a tangentially related line of work make him go sparkly-eyed? The interaction here isn't changed much beyond that, so once they're done talking here, RWBY sets off with Oobleck and they're all rocketing towards Mountain Glen. There's the flight to the settlement, the explanation why it was chosen to be scouted in specific, Oobleck discovering Zwei, and the first encounter with the Grim. All those scenes from the get-go weren't just good, but excellent, mostly because of how well Oobleck himself is written and how much fun the cast and animators seem to have had, so I won't be tweaking them much. The biggest thing is to make the girls more winded from fighting the Grim, especially since there was so much build for them last season, and this is the first time the team has come up against the common ground forces such as Beowulfs. Also interspersed are a few exotic animals from Remnant itself that I introduced last season to give a little bit of variety in the enemies they face and a little more character to the ruins themselves. We now reach the point where Oobleck intercuts with the fight to grill our girls on why they became huntsmen. Oddly enough, I'm keeping Yang's original response for reasons I'll get to next episode, however Weiss's and Blake's needs a little more tweaking. Weiss's whole honor spiel doesn't honestly make too much sense from really any angle considering what we know about the Schnees, so instead we're switching it to build on what was established in the previous season. Weiss is becoming a huntress to become self-reliant for her own safety. She's grown up in a family where her life is constantly in mortal peril, and she knows she'll be under that threat for the rest of her life, so when the chips are down, she'd rather have control over her own protection rather than wait for someone else to do the work for her. Blake's original line here seems more or less like it belonged to someone going into the White Fang, not trying to redeem themselves after leaving it. At the same time, her real motivation of using it as a shield, having the protector from the White Fang, feels like something that she wouldn't share with a teacher, much like Yang and Weiss also don't give Oobleck 100% of their own stories. So instead we're opting for an option that seems somewhat more relatable, to find purpose. Blake is and has been good at fighting, excelled with her skills in the White Fang, but without the White Fang backing her up, she's been left adrift, unable to channel her abilities she's honed in the last few years. Becoming a huntsman was the only line of work she saw she might have something to cling to. Of course, she doesn't mention the White Fang in specific, but this is the gist of what she says to Oobleck, and when he asks back if she found what she was looking for, her response is that what she's found has been different from what she expected. Not good or bad different, just different. Again, referencing back to Season 1, she's become more reliant on a team when she thought being a huntsman meant working solo. So that all ties together quite nicely. With all the conversations finished, Oobleck instructs the latter three of RWBY to set up camp in a nearby building while he drags RWBY herself off for a talk. The scene pans out much the same, with Oobleck and RWBY talking about the nature of Goliaths, with some dialogue tweaks to fix general inconsistencies.
What is that? It looks awesome!
That, my dear girl, is a grin.
RWBY, Oobleck, please learn to pluralize. When that finishes and RWBY asks Oobleck why he becomes a huntsman, we get a twist on the original scene. The dialogue is perfectly fine, Oobleck's motivation is absolutely solid, and the way he delivers it to RWBY is spot on for a teacher, but the visuals were always a bit dull, so we're going to have them pull double duty in this instance. Instead of RWBY and Oobleck walking around the ruins, we get Weiss, Blake, and Yang all setting up base camp, clearing away debris and looking for supplies. As they clear away an entrance that's been caved in, they stumble upon a series of 4 skeletons, a family that had died back when Mountain Glen originally fell. They're all aghast by the scene, and when Oobleck's words about preventable deaths linger, they all silently agree to seal away the entrance. With it covered, Oobleck's speech comes to an end, and the three get the campfire started, all lost in thought over finding the remains. Yang voices disappointment that didn't find anything useful, though it's notably more dour than the original delivery. Blake makes a crack about being in the right place at the right time, and Weiss jumps in suddenly wanting to clarify what she meant about taking the initiative with her own self-defense. The three mumble about how there's more going on than what they told Oobleck, and they muddle around how aimless they all feel. There's no affirmation from Yang that they all know why they're there. RWBY and Oobleck come in, RWBY volunteers for first watch, and when Yang asks if Oobleck grilled RWBY on her motivations, RWBY shrugs and says no, which only serves to put the other three ill at ease. The episode ends with RWBY on her perch with Zwei listening to the howls of the Beowulfs in the distance. So episode 16 begins, and we can have that quiet little moment between Glinda and Ironwood discussing Osmond's decision to be passive, but the real bulk of the changes to this episode are going to come in the conversation around the campfire between the latter three members of RWBY. Oh boy, this one's going to be a fun one to fix. The conversation between the three starts out the same, with all of them unable to really sleep and reopening the question of why Oobleck grilled them. Weiss is the first to really open up, talking about how going to Beacon was just a way to improve her own ability to defend herself. After seeing so many loved ones die at the hands of the White Fang and other assassins, she decided to take her own personal security into her own hands. Her father said she had to go to Beacon instead of Atlas because he didn't want her to get conscripted into the military as every Atlas student is, and she would have the ability to go back to the Dust Company and fulfill her role as heiress. But now, after being with Team RWBY, she's gotten a taste of freedom that she didn't have while living her life as a proper Schnee, and while some of it is grating, she'd be lying if she said most of it wasn't enjoyable. On top of that, this freedom has put her face to face with a lot of facts that she was wrong about. She looks pointedly over at Blake before finishing that this whole year of Beacon has made her call into question her place in the SDC and life in general. Blake picks up from there, emphasizing with feeling out of place and confused about life. Blake, for her part, wasn't lying about being aimless, talking about Adam and how his ideals and charisma carried her forward. But when she saw how far he'd fallen, how far he'd been willing to go, that's when she left, disgusted to see pure goals tainted. Even after that, Blake didn't believe the corruption spread to the whole organization, that it was localized to just Adam, even though part of her deep down knew the truth. When she joined Beacon, she never had an endgame planned, and when all the original Torchwick robberies started, she thought she had found a purpose, to clear the name of the White Fang. But now that she's found out that the White Fang have radicalized, she's worried that her romanticized version of the White Fang has blinded her. She was willing to fight entire crime lords before admitting the whole of the White Fang had become corrupt. Suddenly, the very idea of equality, something that she tied so closely with her association to the Fang, came into question. Her crisis has her flip-flopping between being completely aimless and following a path of stopping racism against her kind. She admits she's afraid of becoming Adam, fearing that trying to fight for the equality she seeks will just end up radicalizing her in the end. Yang tries to assuage her, saying Blake knows her limits and when to pull back, but Blake refutes that, pointing out that her entire life has been a steady stream of her getting swept up in her ideals. Running away from her parents to join the Fang, aiding and sabotaging in espionage, rushing to defend the White Fang, wanting revenge for Tuxin's death. Every time she had the chance to walk away, and each time she was drawn to act in a way that wasn't healthy. Now we're cutting the part where she tries to tie it back into her semblance, not because it doesn't thematically fit. I actually think there's something to be said about leaving a shadow behind where you used to be that really gels with this conflicted interpretation of Blake, but because it seems kind of odd for her to be pointing it out of the blue. I also like to leave interpretation of those kinds of things up to the individual viewer and the community. I don't know, maybe that's just me. The three go quiet and Yang pipes in that she can relate about self-destructive tendencies. It's the prime reason she wanted to help Blake back when she was having her anxiety attacks after learning Tuxin died. She reflects that her devil-may-care attitude towards things has always been a band-aid to help her cope with the fact that her mother abandoned her, that all at once she wants to find her mother for answers while also forgetting she ever existed, hence her boozing and schmoozing last season. Being so focused on the family that she lost got so bad that she almost forgot about the family she still has, and this is where she pointedly looks over to RWBY in her little sniper cubby. This is where Yang reflects on RWBY, and for the most part it's supposed to come off as a complete juxtaposition to the other three girls. RWBY of the four of them has the simplest motivation, to be a hero, a desire that she's had since she was little. While Weiss struggles with what it means to be a Schnee versus what it means to be Weiss, while Blake has one half of her dragged towards radicalism and the other half dragged towards apathy, while Yang has to wrestle with if she even wants to see her mother again, RWBY has been a constant, lasered in on her goal of saving lives and protecting hope wherever she can. And in that, Yang manages to find some solace. Weiss counters that RWBY is still a kid, that she still has a lot to learn, and Blake defends that she's only 2 years younger, that they're all kids. This is where Yang acknowledges that after what they've been through, they're really not anymore, none of them are. They go back and forth about what it means to be a huntsman, and Weiss is the only one that lays it flat that being a huntsman is a job, that ultimately all of them came to Beacon for their own reasons, but all of those reasons have to come second to the work they do. The scene ends and the campfire embers die down and we fold over to the evening of the next day. The group is now exploring another section of the city and it's going rather smoothly. Morale is up after the brief existential crisis around the campfire and the girls are slowly getting into a groove tackling some of the bigger grim they've come across, though it's still a considerable effort. This is when Zwei finally comes into the fold as more than a cuddly sidekick. He starts barking at a nearby building and RWBY decides to check it out, stepping around a corner and a horribly damaged piece of the roadway to do so. This decision is quick, and she's not all that far from the rest of our team who are mopping up a few straggling grim a little ways away, so taking a little peek into a storefront entrance shouldn't be that big of a deal. But it becomes a big deal because the minute she steps through the doorway, she's jumped by White Fang members and is sent into a brief, dizzying close-range skirmish. There are 3 assailants and RWBY, even when blindsided, manages to at least hold back 2 of them, but it's not enough when the third grabs a hold of her and starts choking her. In a last-ditch escape attempt, RWBY fires Crescent Rose, propelling her and the White Fang member into the middle of the roadway just where the damaged section I mentioned earlier was. RWBY drops Crescent Rose along the way, and as they land, that portion of the road collapses. They land on one of the underground buildings about 2 or 3 stories down. Both of them are alive, but out of it, especially the White Fang member since RWBY landed on him. She stands just as 2 more scouts come out of a nearby door to investigate the sound they heard. RWBY, realizing that she doesn't have her scythe, smiles at them, gives a wave, and bolts across the rooftop, activating her semblance to jump to the next building across the road. The 2 mooks rush to their ally and start raising an alarm. We cut briefly to the heart of the White Fang encampment with Roman coming out of his personal tent, hovel, den, whatever private space they have for him down there. He comes out asking why all the ruckus is about, only for the White Fang lieutenant to respond that there's an intruder. Roman rolls his eyes, having now gone through 2 other scenarios just like this. He just groans, "Ugh, not again," before retreating into his cabin, yeah, let's stick with cabin, and waking Neo up. This is when the rest of Team RWBY notices that RWBY herself is missing and hear the barking going on around the corner. They arrive at the hole to find Zwei about to be kicked by one of the White Fang members that RWBY managed to fight off. If we're being really cheeky here, we can even make him a dog faunus. Weiss and Yang take this personally and knock them out, only for Zwei to continually bark at the hole. They put 2 and 2 together, Oobleck gives one of the best speeches and jokes in the entire show, and we end on the ominous note that they must find her before the threats down there get her. We kick off episode 17 with RWBY fleeing through the underground streets of Mountain Glen, ducking and weaving to outrun and outmaneuver a contingent of White Fang rushing to track her down. During this time, she gets a pretty good picture of the scale of the White Fang operation, including a huge train with at least 20 cars to it. However, repeated use of her semblance is wearing her down, and her luck runs out when she runs right to where Roman is staying. The crime lord, who has been coordinating with the chase, is waiting for her and uses his hook shot to grab her and reel her in. The last thing she sees is Neo's foot coming down on her face. Meanwhile, with the rest of the team, we find them entering the underground holding one of the White Fang members who ambushed RWBY hostage. Maybe we'll throw in an offhand comment here about not calling her on her scroll, because if the place is as swarming with White Fang as their hostage told them, all that would do would be bring attention to her that she didn't need. RWBY for his part is on a call with Osmond, who doubles down that they are a scouting party and are to do everything they can to stay out of the situation and report back safely. He's gotten in touch with every active duty huntsman he can find and has sent them to clear that segment of Mountain Glen, so getting RWBY and getting out of there are top priority for our protagonists. RWBY says engagement is most likely going to be necessary, which Osmond ruefully acknowledges and tells the team to be careful. It should be noted that the call is more distorted the deeper down they go, which will explain the poor signal issues at the end of this episode. There's a small gag between them and the hostage before knocking him out and exploring the ruins. They don't get very far as patrols are constant down here, so they have to hole up and plan what to do, only for Zwei to not hide and stand completely out in the open. In a small mirror to the earlier get back in the bag scene, a White Fang patrol spots the dog and the team realizes they've been had. Zwei, unperturbed, barks at them. We cut back to Roman, who is interrogating RWBY, who is tied to a chair, and this is interesting because it's the first time RWBY and Torchwick can ever really carry a full conversation together. Here we finally get a little more interplay with them than just beating each other senseless. Roman admits that he doesn't like the idea of killing children, but he will if he has to. If she wants to live, all she has to do is tell him who else might know about what she was doing and where she is. RWBY plays dumb, but he strikes her with his cane and calls her out on it, prompting her to go completely the other end of the spectrum, saying that all the huntsmen in Vale know and they'll be coming for Roman any second now. Roman finally presses harder, striking her again, and she still manages to give a coy, "The truth is somewhere in between." This actually gets a laugh out of Roman, and he muses that he could beat on her for hours without her dying thanks to her aura. But he's impressed. Even without her overgrown gardening tool, she's still standing up to him. He even remarks that she reminds him a little of himself. This is where RWBY throws him a curveball and capitalizes on that moment of flippancy. She asks how she's like him, and he briefly humors her, painting the picture of a brash young man out to make a name for himself in the world, full of hope and wonder, excited just to see the next day. Of course, she follows up and asks what happened to change him, and that's when he draws back, reasserting his measured facade. He replies it's none of her business and steps away, explaining he's going to get a drink before coming back to finish squeezing the information he wants out of her. We cut back to the rest of RWBY and RWBY engaged in a battle against a growing contingent of White Fang. We finally get some good examples of teamwork, such as Weiss catapulting Yang into the crowd so she can do her slam attack from the yellow trailer, and Blake using the chaos to her advantage to stealthily knock out everyone who escaped that attack. More or less, it's a straightforward fight that makes up a nice amount of the episode. Back with Roman, he's downing a scotch as Neo watches. Roman and her converse, well, she's mute, so just facial expressions on Neo's end, over RWBY and how for a brief moment there she got under his skin. He remembers being just like her in a time before even Neo knew him, and it's a sore spot for him to see her go through the reality check of being tortured. He also admits that it's harder to hurt a kid when it's not in the heat of combat, but a stiff drink helps melt that mental block away just as well. He's about to head out to finish the job, either to get the information or kill her, when the rest of Team RWBY charges their way into the camp. Roman, quickly and verbally deducing it's probably RWBY's friends, mostly for Neo's benefit, quickly rushes outside to kill RWBY, only to find that she's used her incredible leg strength, she is a runner after all, to break the legs of the chair she was tied to and sprinted off towards her team. Seeing their forces get pushed back and their entire operation threatened, the lieutenant gives orders for them to initiate the plan early, get everyone on the train and get the train rolling. Roman balks at this, saying that getting on the train now is a death sentence, going even further by saying he isn't even supposed to be there when the plan goes off. The lieutenant tells him tough shit before shoving him aside, saying he can get on the train and make an attempt to escape, or stay and get arrested by the huntsmen on their tail. Roman grumbles and tells Neo that they're going to leave, only to be cut off by Team RWBY, forcing the both of them to flee back towards the train as well. RWBY reunites with her team, explains what she saw, and tries to contact backup from not just Team Juniper but also Coffee and Season, but those attempts come back with a low signal message and the message goes through garbled. RWBY tries to get through to Osmond and Glinda but suffers the same issue. The episode ends when the five of them decide to stop that train. Thank you for watching Section 4 of Fixing RWBY Part 4. I'd love to give a big shout out to all of my wonderful patrons who have each helped this channel grow into what it is today. If you want to support the channel, please consider donating at patreon.com/CelticPhoenix. Remember, by donating $1 or more, you can get access to the Team Frostbite Discord server, where personalities like myself, FamtanFalling, and Tom Horan of Six Lick Productions regularly interact with our supporters. Please stick around for the next installment, and I'll catch you all on the flip side.